we take young adults making less than $400 a year, unemployed, and getting them into jobs. So there's three big numbers we track, right? How many folks did we get into jobs? How many of them kept them for a year? And by the way, we picked a year because all our research shows that if somebody keeps a job for a year, even if they get laid off, they'll get another job. They're going to be okay. If someone keeps a job for less than a year and they get laid off or fired, they're going to probably slide back into what they were doing before. So that year mark is important, right? So how many folks did we get a job? How many kept it for a year? And how much are they making? So that's the biggie.
Cash flow. Cash flow. Did you clear your cash flow?
This is going to be a different episode than normal. The podcast is called Cash Flow. C-A-C-H-E is how it's spelled. And most of the guests are tech founders, tech CEOs. So it's most of the time it's about building businesses that are making money. So this is the first time I've had a nonprofit CEO. I'm a huge fan of Hopeworks. The mission is amazing. You guys are doing great stuff in the Philadelphia region. And just to quickly summarize it, Hopeworks started in Camden, New Jersey, has spread out through into Philly now, and Philadelphia. And the mission of Hopeworks, the mission you guys are working on, is to end poverty in the region. And you're doing that by teaching young adults how to code, how to build websites, how to do design, build apps, digital marketing, GIS, teaching them really important tech skills, but also helping them deal with the trauma that they may have, been through, living in poverty and potentially in a bad situation, whether it's with, abusive family or just like growing up in a rough neighborhood, and also helping them get the professional skills they need, the soft skills to be able to succeed in a work environment. So it's just all around what you guys are doing is awesome. I'd love to hear, like, your story is amazing. I've heard parts of your story before, so I'm excited to hear the full story end to end today. And with all that, Dan, thanks for coming on.
Oh man, so excited to talk to you, Brian. Really excited to be here. Honored to chat with you today. So I'm psyched.
Cool. So just let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you, we'll get to like how you got involved in Hopeworks and then, became the CEO. And but like, let's start like at the beginning. How did you get involved in this type of work, and what was your story?
Sure. Well, the part that a lot of folks don't talk about enough is I started doing this work not because I had some vision to change the world, some folks do, or not because that I had some epiphany moment. I got into this work because growing up, my family didn't have a lot of money, and I went to college, and teaching was a steady job. So that's how I started teaching. But when I was deciding where I was going to teach, I had a choice at the end of college, right? I had been doing a student teaching at this fancy magnet school where all the kids were brilliant and everything was awesome. And that was kind of like where I was supposed to go teach, right? And I had an opportunity there. But then at the same time, I had been tutoring with some folks that were coming out of incarceration, folks that were on probation. And I had another opportunity to teach at this detention facility. Pay was much lower. It wasn't a glamorous position, but I had an opportunity to teach there. And when I was about to start my career, I had this moment where I had to really decide. And so it was the end of the school year for both schools. And so I went to graduation, right? And both graduations were great, right? I went to the impressive magnet school, and families were excited, and they were going to all these fancy schools, and it was great. And then I went to the graduation for the detention facility, and it was much smaller. It was in a gym, right? But I remember the parents, they were like, I wasn't sure my kid was going to make it to 18, much less graduate. And I had a moment, I was like, well, I could go to graduations and feel like I did a small part, or I could do this every year. And the choice was clear, much, I have to tell you, to my mother's disappointment.
Wow, that's a really powerful story. So, I don't normally talk about normally it's like more logical stuff that we talk about on this show, but like, I'm curious, like what that feeling was like when you made that decision. How did you come to that conclusion?
So I wasn't sure about it, is the short answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And being honest, like sometimes when folks tell the story, it's like, and I knew in the moment a beam of sunshine came down, right? But if I'm honest, I had to tell everybody by Friday, right? So Thursday night, I'm like, what am I going to do? And I just thought about like, where in 10 years would I be proud to say what I did, right? And they were both fine, but doing the detention facility stuff, I was like, we're going to do something here, right? The fancy magnet school was awesome. It would be great, and I would just kind of be keeping things the same, right? I would be doing my part to keep things going. And I was like, I'm not sure if I'm happy with the way things are going, right? And so I knew at the detention facility I could do something different. So I made the call. That was Friday. I made the call. Regretted it on Saturday, right? Talked to my mom on Sunday, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And then I started, a week later, and the moment I walked in, I was like, "This was the right choice," and we ran from there.
That's cool. There's like, I think about this a lot. There's, everybody has certain, a few points in their life that they can pick out where, you had a decision to make. And if you went one way, and I'm sure there's like more micro examples of this as well, but sometimes there's like these really pivotal decisions in life to make that if you go one way or the other way, it has vastly different outcomes on your entire life. And, I know you as a person, so I'm sure you would have done really great things at the magnet school, but I can only imagine like how different your life would have turned out if you chose the other school.
It would have been really different for sure.
That's wild to think about. All right, cool. So, all right, you accepted the job, and your first day, what was that like?
Well, so what you have to know, and if folks are listening, is that I'm older now. I'm in my 40s, but so in my 20s, I looked like a wimpy version of Harry Potter, right? And so you can imagine this dude walking in, a slightly squeaky voice coming into a detention facility, and man, I got to say, we rocked it. We had so much fun.
Where was it, by the way?
It was outside of Philly, in the suburbs of Philly.
Okay.
So we're getting kids from Philly, and so two things that I always remember about that first year. The first was after the first couple of weeks, where everybody was like, "Man, this dude looks like Harry Potter, but he's kind of intense. Like we're doing this." One of the young men is like, Miss Rhoton, like, why are you so into this? Like, why did you want to teach here? Because you can imagine, I took it seriously, right? I was gunning for him, and I was like, dudes, like, I had this chance to teach here at the most selective school in the region. And I was kind of joking, but I kind of wasn't, because listen, like the way I always thought about it, my experience was that, like, look, if you're 16, 15, 16, 17, and you're doing enough stuff that they're sending you away to get locked up, now you're doing bad stuff. I don't want to take anything away, but I'll tell you something else. Ambition ain't your problem, right? I mean, these are young men. They were all men. These are young men that, like, given the choice between like giving up or sitting in their mom's basement or getting out there and making money and doing something with their life, they chose getting out there, right? Brave, like literally dangerous, right? And they're out there doing it. Like, now they were going in the wrong direction. Okay, I hear you, but like, that's who I want to work with, right? The fire's there. You got to be on your toes. Like it's a directional challenge. It's not an ambition or drive challenge, right? Like, bring it on, right?
That's so cool. I was thinking about that too, and I meant to say this in the intro, and I just skipped my mind. But like, I've met a lot of the students, the young adults at Hopeworks, and I wonder like how many of those in 10 years will be coming on a podcast like this, telling their entrepreneurial story of how they got their company started, and how their business works and all that kind of cool stuff.
That's it, and that's exactly it. Like these were young men who, given the chance to make money, become entrepreneurs, do something with their family, chose it. Now they chose the thing that was right outside their door, right? Which was illegal, clearly. But like, that's what they did. And if they'd grown up somewhere else, they would have been out there starting a tech business. So like, that was who I wanted to work with. And like, man, we had so much fun that first year. But the other thing I remember about the first year was the very last day of school that day. I was sitting in my room, cleaning up, getting ready for graduation. It'd been a great first year. I was feeling very pleased with myself. And And in walks the dean of students. Now, this dean of students at this place looked like how you would imagine a dean of students at a detention facility looked like, right? Big old beard, like 10 feet tall, boots. Now, what he wouldn't tell you is he also had a master's degree in social work. But anyway, that was not the look, right? And I spent probably most of my first year terrified of this dude, right? I did not want to get in trouble with this dude. He was scary. This dude comes in, he's like, Dan. I was like, hello, Mr. Lee, you right? It's like, here. And he drops a $20 bill on my desk. He's like, I owe that to you. And I'm like, Mr. Lee, I am certain I have never in my life, nor will I ever borrow money from you. And he's like, no, I owe it to you. And I'm like, Mr. Lee, I am certain you don't. He's like, no, you do. That's what I bet you wouldn't last the first week.
Oh, man.
So I took the money. And that was my first year there. And from there, man, I got to tell you, I was there for 15 years. I was a teacher there. I was a school administrator there. And we did awesome stuff there. One of my alumni is an Obama fellow. We had young men doing amazing stuff. It was a super fun job.
That's cool. 15 years. Yeah, you spent a long time there.
Yeah. And then but the part is there was a time when I realized I couldn't stay there longer, right? Because full transparency, my plan was I was going to retire from there. I was killing it. I was having so much fun. It was awesome. But the reason I ended up at Hopeworks from there was a young man by the name of Marcus. So I remember I was out. I think it was a Saturday. I was walking through North Philly. I don't know why I was up there, but I was doing something. And I'm walking down the street and I hear, hey, Mr. Rhoton, Mr. Rhoton. There's Marcus. And I knew Marcus. He'd been in my class, super smart, graduated, done everything right. He comes running over. He calls over a couple of his friends. And he starts saying these amazing things about what a great teacher I was, how I inspired him, how he really understood math. I mean, Brian, it felt great, you know. And I said, Marcus, you know, this feels great, but you know what would make it feel any better, hearing all these nice things, is if you weren't dealing drugs right now.
Yeah, I've heard you tell that story. That's so wild.
And it killed me. And I was like, what's going on? And he told me a story that like he got out, he tried to do the right thing. He had a baby at home. He couldn't get a job. Nobody would hire him. And so he went and started making money the way that he did. And I have to say, as much fun as I had teaching, I'd been doing it for 15 years. I mean, I was there forever. You know, again, we'd done all this great stuff. That was hard, right? Because I was like, man, I've spent all this time and energy teaching folks, and like the whole like education's gonna solve it, right? That was the theory, right? You give folks education, get them a diploma. So that meeting was hard, and then that day, actually, that afternoon after that encounter, I drove back to the school and I started looking up files of other Marcuses, right? And trying to get in touch with them and figuring out like what happened. And like Marcus wasn't the only one with that story, right? And so I was like, okay, well, no, that's not true. I spent like 2 or 3 days being like, crap, like, what am I doing? And then I really was like, I'm generally a pretty positive person, but that was a tough moment, right? I was like, man, I've been doing this for 15 years, doing all this good stuff. How many folks have I let down, right? Because just being honest, I felt like what I said to folks all the time, because you can imagine the young men in my class were not really eager for the education I was providing in the first couple of weeks. I had them, right? This was not their experience. In fact, just one side story I will tell you, just to give you a sense, is I remember there's this one young man, Jamal, huge guy. I mean, just massive, right? He was a little tricky at start. He did not want to do this math thing. He did not want to graduate. We got through it. And then I'm at graduation and I had brought a guest with me. And so he's meeting my guest and saying, oh, yeah, Mr. Rhoton's a great teacher. And my guest is like, oh, that's nice. And then he pauses. He's like, no, you don't understand. This guy really knows how to talk to people. And I was like, Jamal, you did the work. And he's like, and then he turns to me in front of my guest and he says, oh no, Mr. Rhoton, first couple of weeks, he's in his cap and gown now. So picture this huge dude, cap and gown, turns to me, he's like, "Oh, no, no, Mr. Rhoton, you really did change me. First couple of weeks in your class, I just thought about throwing chairs at you." So I was like, "All right, Jamal, I'll take that one. I'll take that compliment." But the point was, so I've been doing all this work. I've been the Jamals of the world, the Marcus of the world. I've been selling them this bill of goods, right? Like, hey, man, you did some crazy stuff. You're here now. Get the education you need. You're going to get out there, and you're going to be able to turn things around. And a lot did. I don't want to take anything away, but then I realized like a lot didn't, and it wasn't their fault.
Because they
So I
go
was
right
like,
back to the same environment.
that's it. And there was nobody willing to give him a shot. Like here's a young man, tattoos. He's coming from incarceration. There's and he has no experience. He has no experience, right? And so there were so many companies that wouldn't give him a shot, and they still got to earn money. And I really like spent some time reflecting, like how many folks did I like make a promise that their lives would be different, that like I didn't keep it. So then 15 years in, I had this nice little thing. I had this path. That's what I was gonna do. And then I was just like, all right, I gotta figure out a way to solve this one. So that was kind of the second kind of key point for me, if that makes sense.
I want to take a quick break from the episode and say, if you're enjoying this content, the best way you can say thank you is to subscribe. So if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, hit the subscribe button there as well. And also share it out to your friends and colleagues. If you find this content useful and you think other people will enjoy it as well, please send it out. And back to the episode. Did you found Hopeworks, or was that, did you join?
So no, that's exactly what happened. So you can imagine I spent a few days just feeling sorry for myself, right? That happened. And then I was like, all right, what am I going to do? And so I said, okay. And actually, I followed up with Marcus. I was like, dude, like, what would have made the difference, right? Like, I let you down, right? Like, what would have made the difference? And he was like, truthfully, if I could have gotten a job, like then I could have, then I was like, all right. So then I started looking around, like, I need to do something with people that get people jobs. And so I started looking around, and frankly, what I saw wasn't super encouraging. Right. Like there are a lot of places that would train folks for jobs or get them little certificates or help them with their resume. But I kind of saw the same problem that I'd had, is that like it seemed like a lot of these places when I visited them were like making promises that they couldn't keep. Right. So I was like, all right. So then I found out about this place called Hopeworks. At the time, it was like a 3 or 4 person operation. It run out of a house in North Camden. It was founded really to teach kids to code in 2000. I didn't found it. It was actually founded by 3 churches. Father Jeff Putoff was the founder, who kind of really got things going. Classic visionary who like really gets things going. Probably not unlike many entrepreneurs you have on this show, right? Like driven, really, really incredible guy. And when I heard about them, they had just started really having this idea, which was like, what if rather than teach folks to code, we like taught them skills, and then we had businesses where we could employ them, right? And it was just kind of starting, and so like I said, it was a really small operation. But I was like, that to me sounds like the right idea. And so essentially I went there and I was like, listen, I think you have the right idea. If we're going to do anything with this, we got to do more than, a couple a year. We got to really do this. I would like you to let me help you with this. So I convinced them, so Hopeworks brought me on, and for the first year and a half, I was like the COO, I was the chief operating officer, right? And we did a lot of good work to kind of get things going. And then after that, I took over as the CEO, and then the goal was like, all right, step 1, make sure this thing works. We got that going, and then now step 2 is like, let's do more of that, right? And start moving the needle.
So how did you how did you validate that it's working? Like the market situation, how did you validate that?
So there are 3 steps we had to do. The first step is we had to stop relying on our stories. And here's what I mean by that. In nonprofit industry, we have really inspiring stories, right? Like folks change their lives. It's incredible, right? But the danger is what we were doing at Hopeworks is we were relying on those stories to make us feel like we were being effective. And the fact is, one really inspiring story can cover up a lot of ineffective behavior. So the first thing we did is, of course, we still enjoyed the story, but we started creating dashboards and weekly and monthly reporting so we could see what we were actually doing. The second thing that we did is once we figured that out.
Just on that, what were like the KPIs on the dashboards?
So there was like the ultimate KPI, right? Fundamentally, Hopeworks only has one thing we do, right? We take young adults making less than $400 a year, unemployed, and getting them into jobs, right? So there's three big numbers we track, right? How many folks did we get into jobs? How many of them kept them for a year? And by the way, we picked a year because all our research shows that if somebody keeps a job for a year, even if they get laid off, they'll get another job, right? They're going to be okay. If someone keeps a job for less than a year and they get laid off or fired, they're going to probably slide back into what they were doing before. So that year mark is important, right? So how many folks did we get a job? How many kept it for a year? And how much are they making, right? So that's the biggie.
And are those like percentages and averages? Like that's kind of the numbers that you look at?
Yep, every month. That's it. Like right now at Hopeworks, this year we're placing 125 folks in jobs. That means we've got to place between 10 and 11 folks every month, right? And I always say, like, one story is inspirational, but moving the needle takes efficiency, right? And so, so like last month we placed 10, the month before we placed 15. We're on target, right? Then the second thing we had to start looking at is, okay, so that happens, but we got to know what are the behaviors that we are doing day to day to make that thing happen at the end of the year, right? And again,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm curious on that. You got me thinking about that. So I've met a lot of the students at Hopeworks, and a lot of them are really impressive. What do you find situations where you feel like you're just kind of trying to push them into getting a job, as opposed, or do they almost always, or do they always want it to the point that like you're just helping them and they're going out to do it?
Yeah, so everybody wants it, right? I mean, that whole, you've probably heard the whole like, oh, folks don't want to work. We have a waiting list that as of this morning has 88 people on it. Folks want to work, they want to do it. But where the work really comes in is convincing young adults that they can do it, right? Because it's just like anything else. Like if I'm going to start running a marathon, the hardest part is when I take that first jog and I go 2 blocks and I'm out of breath. That's when I'm going to quit, right? That's when I'm going to give up and say, I'm not a marathoner. I can't do it, right? That's what happens at Hopeworks. Young adults come in, they want to do it. They believe they can do it. And it's so unfamiliar. No one in their social circle has done this before. They've never done it before, right? And that's the work of Hopeworks, is saying, well, of course it's hard. Like, it should be hard. And we're going to help you get the rest of the way. If we can get them through that, I always say, if you're running a marathon, once you hit mile 12, you're probably going to run the whole marathon, right? Where you're going to quit is trying to get to mile 1 and 2, right? And that's the work that we're doing.
That's cool. That's awesome. So, all right. So I took you off track there. So, circling back to what you were saying.
Yep. So we had to figure out that, okay, if we're going to get the folks jobs, that's the end of the year. Great. But how do we make sure we're doing it? So like we started figuring out like, what are the things that predict if someone's going to get a job, right? And then we started tracking those, like a couple surprising things we found out, right? Like the biggest predictor we found of whether or not someone's going to get a job is not necessarily how they come in, is not necessarily their attendance the first week, like all those things you'd imagine. You know what we found it is? The best predictor of whether or not someone's going to get a job is how often their coach meets with them.
How often their what?
Their coach meets with them.
Interesting.
Right? And that's what we found is if a coach meets with somebody every single week, never misses a day, like is on it, even if if the young adult misses a day, the coach makes up the session. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If they're meeting every day, and then you start thinking, oh, that makes sense. If my personal trainer is relentless, and if I miss a session, the personal trainer comes to my house. That's kind of what we do at Hopeworks, right? then I am going to get in shape, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. And maybe it's partly that, like maybe it partly is about creating discipline, but maybe it's also like partly that if somebody else believes in that person that much, like how can they not believe in themselves? Maybe that's like some of the thinking, whether it's conscious or subconscious. I don't know. I'm just totally speculating, but
No, that's it. In fact, what we found is a couple of the key things, other things that we found are really important is if somebody doesn't show up, we call, we text, and we email them within 30 minutes of when they're supposed to be there. And that's important. They never pick up the phone. Seldom do they answer the text. That's not the point. The point is that they are immediately missed. We expected you to be here, right? I always joke, if I didn't show up at work, I hope somebody would be worried and call, right? But with young adults changing their lives, a lot of times folks message by how they act that they don't expect you to succeed. A young adult doesn't show up to a training program and nobody calls. They say, oh, I guess he didn't want it. Well, you're sending a clear message to that young adult when they don't show up and you don't do anything. You don't act worried. You don't check in on them, right?
how often does that happen? People not show up. I'm sure it's probably more in the beginning.
Exactly, all the time. And that's the point, right? Is that we know that poverty and trauma like has an impact on people, right? And so we can be surprised each time someone doesn't show up and being a little funny, like, gasp, I can't believe they didn't show up. Or we know that they're not going to show up and we know why they won't show up. I don't know which young adult at Hopeworks is going to lose their housing while they're in training, but I know about 30% will. It's very reliable. So we can act like it's some insurmountable problem, or what we did, we know 30% will lose their housing at some point during training. So that tells us how many slots we need to set up at the local shelters for our young adults. And then boom, oh, you lost your housing? This isn't a shock to us. Sadly, it's normal. And we know how to handle it, right? I always say it's like the difference between walking into the emergency room and saying, my leg hurts. Kind of the old school way of most training programs, they say, oh, well, your leg hurts. You have to work harder. Oh, well, what did you do to it? It's your fault, right? Oh, my goodness, we don't know what to do. As opposed to you walk into emergency room, and they're like, oh, your leg hurts? Let me see. Yep, it's broken. We see it all the time. Here's what you have to do, right? One way, you feel like it's your fault and you're never going to go back to that emergency room again, right? The other way, you're like, oh, they actually understand my problem, and it seems like they know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the secret.
It's so amazing. I mean, I live right in Center City, Philadelphia. So every single time I walk out my door, I see, homeless people and people that are, addicted to drugs or have mental illnesses. And they just, they can't participate in society the way that is, typically expected. And, I can't, I can only imagine like how many of those people, if they had access to a program like Hopeworks when they were, in their late teens, early 20s, how different would their life look like today? Would they still be on the street corner?
That's it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that's like, you guys are starting, obviously like there's stuff that happens before that stage in life, but like right at the beginning of their professional life, they're, if you want to call it that, like at the transition point when, by societal definition, you should go into your professional stage of life. You guys are starting right at that point in their life, and kind of being like the Sherpa of, the professional, transitioning into a professional phase of life. So that's it's really interesting and inspiring to me what you guys are doing.
Well, and thank you, first of all. And the other cool thing is like we then get to watch our alumni buy houses, right? Because they're actually making a living wage. We get to watch them bring their kids into Hopeworks, not for Hopeworks services, but just to show their kids where their parents got started. I always joke, the only way we want to see the children of our participants is if they're coming to make a donation. Right? Every young adult we place in that living wage job is somebody that's never going to have to use Hopeworks, right? That's a child that's going to have stable housing. That's a child whose parents are going to have income. So like,
and you've also taught them like emotional coping skills. So like you're ending the cycle of, you're helping to end that cycle of trauma and
That's it.
yeah, repeating repeating the cycle over. You're kind of you're stopping it. At a, you know, stop. It's a multi-generational cycle, I'm sure, but you're like stopping it right there.
You got it. And there are folks where we trained and placed the older sister, and then the younger sister came, then their younger brother came, and then their younger brother came, and they're all working now at these great jobs. Like the trajectory for that family is going to be different, right? And like that's the promise of what we're doing here, right? And that's why it's so exciting.
That's so cool. What's so let's kind of I think we skipped over some of the details of Hopeworks. So there was like the early days in the house. I've heard a lot of stories. I wasn't there and I didn't see it, but I saw the house, or I've heard stories about the house, and then I've seen your Camden office. And now I got to watch you guys open the Philly location, the Kensington location. So just talk through, you know, what it was like through those phases, and then what's the next phase after Kensington?
Yep. So, you know, and thank you for asking. Yep. So, and kind of like the best way to think about our growth is, you know, when we started making this shift back in 2012, right? When I first started working, we placed, I think, 5 or 6 folks into jobs, right? It was tiny, right? We figured out what we had to do. We started tracking, we figured out it worked, and then we had to do more, right? So within 2 years, that house was full. We were taking meetings on the porch. folks would have sessions in their cars, right? Because there was just no room, right? Okay, so now it's going. So then we took over the building next door, right? Because our businesses were growing too. We were getting bigger contracts because remember, we train folks, but then we have these businesses in web and geographic information systems that employ folks. Those businesses were growing too. Probably one of the seminal moments for that was we have this GIS department. For folks who don't know, GIS is digital mapping and data analysis. And one of our big clients now is American Water, the national utility company. But at the time, we were just trying to close this big contract, and folks didn't know if, you know, young adults from Camden, right, with no work experience to do this high level stuff. And we had just gotten, Brian, this person, Chris Kahn from American Water, had taken a chance on us. He had given us this $30,000 contract to do field data collection. And man, this is the time we're so small. This is a huge opportunity for us, right? And I remember we had just sent our first teams out to do the first 2 weeks of data collection. I was like a mother hen, you know, how to go. Everything's going right. Okay, we're doing great. We were going to nail this until I got this call from American Water. Hey, Dan, do you have a moment to talk about the data collection? And I don't know if there's right, yeah, I don't know if there's entrepreneurs on the call or business owners, but like you can imagine, my stomach was upset from that. The moment I got that email until the call, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm checking with the team. Did something go wrong? Did somebody drop something? Like, was there an incident? And no one can tell me what it was. So I'm like, so I'm going into this call. My stomach's upset. I'm thinking, what is it? So I, you know, pick up the phone, you know, and I'm like, you know, hey, American Water, happy to talk about whatever is going on. You know, we're ready to partner. And, you know, I was just ready, you know, and the whole time in my brain, I'm like, oh, I can't believe we messed this up, right? You can imagine the feeling. The guy says, well, I wanted to talk to you because I was curious about your performance in the field. And I was like, okay, yeah, absolutely. Tell me what you're seeing. You know, I'm here for it. And he said, well, you know, we've done this before with our own engineers, you know, a guy out there in the truck. And it seems like your team of inexperienced folks is doing it faster and more accurately than our folks in the truck. So, of course,
just like, you're like, hold on, I have to go put the phone down and lay down for 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
Oh yeah, no, so of course I was like, well, of course they are. I never had a moment doubt, right? Like that's what I would have expected to see. Now, of course, the economics of it makes sense, right? They had one highly paid engineer in the truck doing it. We had teams of young adults out there. Of course, now in retrospect, of course we were faster and better, right? But what that did, that moment was really important, right? Because that was the moment we proved that on a corporate, you know, industrial scale, we could not just compete with folks in the market, but beat the market, right? And that really set the stage for our growth. And what we started doing is really working both, especially in JS and web. So we grew, and then we took over some more space and another space. At this point, we were spread over 3 locations. We had young adults moving all over the city. It was really inefficient. But we saw this opportunity to like, maybe we could really, really grow this. And the other thing that happened that I knew we were onto something is because as we had more young adults coming through, as we were doing more business, we also needed more placements, right? We needed more places for them to go work. So that's the other part. It's like we had to find employers that would say, like, look, I'm willing to hire this candidate that doesn't have a college degree, right? Maybe doesn't look like a candidate I've ever hired, right? And so I was always worried about that. Like, how many folks can we convince? And I remember I got a phone call one day, and it was the phone call that told me, like, okay, we got to go, right? We got to do more. I got a phone call out of the blue because I'm stressing. I'm like, who's going to hire all these folks? We got all these young adults coming in. We got to keep the promise. And I got this phone call out of the blue. It's like, oh, hi, is this Hopeworks? Yep, this is Hopeworks. Yeah, listen, I run a company, and I'd like to hire a bunch of your young adults, right? And I was like, great, but I was a little suspicious, right? Because I hadn't called this guy. I didn't know who this company was, right? They hadn't interacted with us. So I, great, excited to hear it. Tell me more about your company. It sounded like a great opportunity. Wages were great. And I kept saying, okay, but like, tell me, how'd you hear about us? He's like, oh yeah, in this space. And okay, but why do you, and finally, just because I couldn't get to it, I said, listen, sir, I'm so excited you want to do this. This seems like a great fit, but like, why do you want to hire our young adults? Like, I know they're awesome, but like, you haven't met them. Like, why are you so certain? And he said, oh yeah, I know I want to hire your folks. Oh, yeah, great. Why? He said, well, you guys beat me on my last 3 contracts.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, okay, let's go. Right?
Was it an agency or what was it?
Yeah, it was a engineering firm that had been doing GIS work in the space, and we had beat them, right? And so he's like, who's this person that beat me on the contract? Looked us up and said, oh wait, I could hire my competitors.
That's pretty smart, yeah.
Right. So I was like, all right, we can do this. And so we worked hard, and we opened a 10,000 square foot training facility here in Camden. At this point, we're placing, we're running about 100 a year, 100 young adults a year. And then right when we had it all figured out, right, everything was fine, the pandemic hit. And I have to say that was incredibly hard for our communities. You can imagine vaccination rates in Camden and Philly were lower than elsewhere. Families, a lot of folks, our young adults families either weren't working before, or if they were working, they were working in retail and food service. So they were no longer working. So hard for our families, but it turned into such a massive opportunity for our young adults. So what we found is suddenly companies as far away as North Carolina were looking for help, and they didn't need to move there to get a job there. So we moved from panic, what are we going to do quickly, to like, let's grab this opportunity. So in the middle of the pandemic, we added another 4,000 square feet. We opened a co-working space for our alumni, still in use now. I'm actually sitting next door to it now, where when they would get these virtual jobs, they could work out of the co-working space. It's like we work for Hopeworks alumni only, right? So they have good internet, they have equipment if they need it, they have phone booths where they can take business calls, and our job growth and opportunity for young adults coming out of the pandemic has just exploded, right? Folks really realize that that they have a productivity problem, they have a worker problem, and they have a diversity problem. And I'm clearly biased, but turns out Hopeworks can solve all 3 for you.
That's so cool. So that's the trajectory, and that's around the time I think you were just in construction of the co-working space when I met you and got the tour for the first time. So I guess that was, I don't know if that was 2019 or if it was during the pandemic, but yeah, it was right around that time. And so then you fast forward, now you've got the Kensington location.
Yep. Well, and because what we found was, okay, so then we found that folks were hiring our young adults, right? We were out of space again. It was so funny. I knew we had a problem with our new fancy space when I found myself again having meetings in my car. So was like, okay, this feels familiar. We got to do more, right? Especially since we were changing a lot of lives, no question. Like, when we're placing 100 folks a year, that's equal to $4.3 million in additional wages every year. So we're doing it for sure. But here's what we started thinking, right? Is that, like, if we could do just some little bit more, not only would we place a lot, but we could start changing the narrative about who you hire for these positions, right? If you're placing 1 or 5 or 10, folks are like, that's cute, right? But it's clearly not a scalable solution. But if you're placing 200 or 300, first of all, you're changing those lives, right? We're gunning for 200 jobs next year. That's $8.7 million in additional wages. So, like, that's real. But also, when you're placing 200 a year, folks are like, that's a scalable solution to an employment problem. All these young adults in Camden and Kensington that I've overlooked for decades, maybe they're the reason my company could double or triple in size, right?
Yeah.
And so we realized, like, first of all, there's this huge need, right? Philly's the nation's poorest big city, right? Don't need to tell any of your listeners who are familiar with Philly that violence is an issue. So there's a huge need, but more than that, there's an opportunity here, right? If we could demonstrate that if we could open in Philly, and not just open anywhere in Philly, for folks who don't know, we chose to open in the Kensington neighborhood of Philly, right? Which is, when you're looking about bad things to say about Philly, you will mention Kensington, right? It's a neighborhood that from the outside, folks like to say is struggling, right? But when you get in there, what you actually see is it is a place of huge opportunity in Philly. It is young adults, people ready to work, ready to change their lives. And so in December of 2022, we opened another training facility in Philly. And I got to tell you, by the end of the second week, we were waitlisted. We have over 80 folks I said earlier, waiting on the wait list now. And the last thing is, folks said, oh, if you open it in Kensington, that's a bad neighborhood. Folks won't come to Kensington, right? Turns out, if you're offering folks real opportunity, they will come from everywhere. We have folks coming from every corner of the city. We have one dude coming from Delaware just to get up there.
Well, the cool thing too about Kensington is, you're right. It does get, like, it's kind of like the poster child for bad neighborhoods in Philadelphia, from like a news perspective. But I think it's one of the, I think it's gotten a lot of bad attention. So I think a lot of people there, like, want to, they want to show that it's not like what the news says. But in addition to that, so there's like this, I think there's like a neighborhood camaraderie in Kensington. And in addition to that, it's right next to this neighborhood called Northern Liberties, which is like a tech hub in Philly. There's a street called Nerd Street, which is like tech companies. And, that's a kind of like the opposite demographic of, like the socioeconomic demographic. And in Northern Liberties is very much like the opposite of the Kensington socioeconomics. So like Philly's very much like that, like sort of very much pockets of different neighborhoods. But I actually think it was a genius move to go into Kensington.
Well, and that was why we picked it, right? It checked 3 key boxes. The first box was Hopeworks' mission is to end poverty, right? So what we've learned through our years of experience is you can't end poverty from Center City, right? To end poverty, you got to be proximate to it. You got to be where it's happening. Check. Second thing was important is we know for our model that we have to be proximate not just to poverty, but to folks, employers, and folks who want to help us end it, right? And as you said, it's right next to this tech corridor. It's right next to folks, because we've learned that employers, folks who want to see our young adults in action, they have to be able to get there and see it, right? Check. The third thing we learned that was really important was that our young adults, remember, are coming. No one in their families had these kinds of jobs. They've never had these jobs, which means imposter syndrome. That feeling that you don't deserve this is real for them. So we work really hard to make our spaces, they don't look like schools. They don't look like classrooms. They look like the tech workspaces that our young adults are going to enter. What that meant is we also needed to have a neighborhood that has real estate available that we could build into that kind of space. Check, right?
You have a really cool office, by the way. I love the Kensington office.
And that's the idea, right? In fact, I always joke, like, our goal is that when our young adults start their first job, They walk into that tech office and they're like, well, this is a little cruddy compared to Hopeworks, but I guess it'll do. Like, that's our goal, right? Because our young adults deserve that kind of space, but more importantly, it shows them that they deserve and belong in that kind of space, right? And that's why it's so important. And that's why Kensington was just a perfect fit for us.
Yeah, I love it. So how do you see this scaling? Like how do you think? And let me say preface it. I often talk with entrepreneurs, even on the show, about there's this concept, especially in like SaaS or software businesses, where it's harder to get from 0 to $1 million ARR, annual recurring revenue, than it is to get from $1 million to 10 million. Because you have to prove all the unit economics and the product market fit and figure out, like, you have to deliver successfully on your promises. And to get from like 0 to $1 million is harder than, like, once you get to $1 million, you've got all that stuff figured out. Now it's just a matter of like throwing on jet fuel to get to the 10 million. So you've done that. So you guys have gotten from 0 to like, you said like 300 job placements per year. So like getting from like 300 to 3,000 is probably less of a leap, I would think, than getting from 0 to 300. First of all, would you agree with that? And second, what's next for Hopeworks?
Yeah, so that's it. So we've opened in Philly. We have this model that works. The next 12 months is we're gonna prove not only that we can do it, we know we can do it, but we're also going to prove that we can sustainably fund it, right? Because our businesses are growing quickly. And we also have to get our philanthropic funding, donors and grants. That has to grow too, because that's how we support our young adults as they're making this transition. If we can pull it off, and I think we can, then by this time next year, we will be ready to look at another city, right? Because we did Camden. Philly's our test. It's going well. If we can show that we're doing well, then we're ready to go to Newark, go to Baltimore. And as you said, once that playbook is down, right? The first replication's tough, right? Second one's important. Then we can really start doing this. And the thing that I'm most excited about is, yes, we're going to change lots of lives. Like, right, 100, 200, we're going for next year, 300. But the more important thing the real scalable change is now, if we can pull this off, and we're about to, then we can change the narrative about, often folks continue to see young adults like we work with, young adults who've experienced homelessness, young adults who are coming from Kensington or Camden, young adults who've experienced barriers. Folks see them as a problem, right? But in fact, if we can show people, and we are, that in fact, at scale, these young adults are the solution to your business problem. The reason you can't find the workers that you want, the reason you think that folks don't want to work is because, again, you're looking in the wrong place. We have a waiting list of over 80 folks in Kensington. Our young adults want to work. Like, if we can show companies and show people that young adults in our cities are not the problem, but actually the solution to the biggest problems we're facing, then yes, Hopeworks will place a bazillion people, and that'll be good. But then everyone else will too, right? And that's the play, right? That's the play where we can really make a huge shift.
That's so cool. So let's go into, as we're wrapping this up, let's go into how people listening can help. If any listeners are really inspired by the story, what can they do to help Hopeworks and help the mission?
So the first thing I'll always say is, if you can, come for a visit, right? Visit the website, www.hopeworks.org. But more importantly, come for a visit. I hope you enjoy talking to me. It's always great to talk to you, Brian, but you don't really want to talk to me. You want to meet our young adults and see what they're doing, right? So if you can, come for a visit. But even if you can't, reach out, because there's other ways we can get you involved, right? One of the first ways is to do what's called a listen and learn. Talk to our young adults about your professional journey and help them get there. And that's so important, because remember, our young adults are often the first in their social circle that have ever taken this step into this kind of career. If they can hear how you did it, it shows them the path. And I always joke, if you got straight A's, nothing bad ever happened, went to Harvard, and then got a great job, congrats, but you're of no use to us. But if you're like everybody else that had failures and bumps along the way, let's come on, right? And we can do that in person, we can do that virtually. Then, if you're
it's inspiring for the listeners. I'll be doing one today to help. There's a pitch competition coming up in a few weeks, and just working with these students and seeing them work through their business ideas and how they present them, and helping them achieve their mission. It's really inspiring to see them doing it. So if anybody is in the Philadelphia area or New Jersey area and is on the fence, just go do it.
Yes, thank you. It's awesome, right? And then if you're hiring, do a mock interview with our young adults, right? And you'll see how awesome they are, and you'll help them get through that final thing. And then once you see kind of like how awesome everybody is, like help us do more, right? So we're always looking for companies to utilize our business services and web and GIS. If you're in that field and you're looking for like an awesome subcontractor to pick up a part of the project and keep your costs low, we got you, right? And you're going to change lives while you're doing it. Second thing we're always looking for is folks who are like, look, if you are so sick of hiring the same person that quits after 6 months or asks for a raise after 3 weeks, call us, right? We're placing folks all over the city, and we'd love to help with more companies. And then the third thing is we do need folks to support us philanthropically as well. Every time a young person walks through the door, we got to make sure they're set up with housing. We got to make sure they're trained. We got to make sure their mental health is right. All of that is a cost. And the nice thing is once we take care of those things, they're earning money for themselves and their family from there. So we're always looking for folks to come and help us pay for those bills as well. And those are the really big ways where you can really do a lot with us.
Cool. Dan, this was awesome having you on. I really enjoyed hearing the full story end to end, especially the origin. I've heard bits and pieces of it, but it's really cool to like hear your story all the way through. But anything else you want to close on today?
Just, I have to say thanks to you and thanks to your listeners. And the one thing that's awesome about my job is I either get to talk to young adults who are the bravest people in the world doing this thing. I get to talk to, or I get to talk to folks like you, folks like someone listen who could do anything with their time, right? And have instead chosen to spend their time helping young adults change their lives. So I would say, like, I don't have a lot of supervillains in my life, thanks to people like you, and I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Dan. Well, I'll see you later today. Thanks for coming on.
Great talking to you, man.
Cash flow? Did you clear your cash flow?